my honor to introduce the Frank Islam Athenaeum Symposia's inaugural lecture, Working the Pivot Points to Make America Work Again. Mr. Islam.
This is pretty cool, man. So who's the guy who did this? Professor Carter. We owe you a sincere gratitude from the bottom of my heart. And it will hang in my house, and we'll be proud of your accomplishment. Can you guys hear me? Okay. So this speech will be about half an hour, and after that there'll be quiz. And Joan is the one who's going to take the quiz. She did a wonderful job. Thank you, Joan. And thank you, Dr. Roy. Sanjay and I share a common history and common heritage, and a common commitment to the Montgomery College. So Dr. Pollard, Dr. Roy, distinguished guests, members of the faculty, students, friends, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Dr. Pollard, for your kind introduction. Isn't she good? She's great. People like her embody the American dream. She is an example of American dream. And it tells about America's inclusiveness and openness. And those are the strengths and qualities that we should all be proud of in America. Thank you, Dr. Pollard. And thank you for your kind introduction. I want to express my warm appreciations for your generous welcome. It is a pleasure and honor to be here with all of you in the Montgomery College community to share some perspectives and share some ideas, some thoughts from my new book, which is my second book, Working the Pivot Points. Now, the book will be available in sometimes in mid-October on the Kindles, as well as you can buy it from Amazon. And I hope you buy it, and that will take care of some of my expenses. As the opening to my presentation, I'd like to provide you with a definition of pivot points. Then, in the body of the presentation, I'm going to look inward, outward, forward, and backward. In looking inward, I will discuss individual economic well-being. And in looking outward, I will discuss global competition. In looking forward, I will discuss education and innovation. Finally, in looking backward, I will discuss what pivot points have meant in the history of America. To start with, so what is a pivot point? And guys, I'm sure you guys are puzzled about that. So let me give you my definition. A pivot point is an area that must be leveraged and addressed effectively in order to effectuate change and achieve positive outcomes. Pivot points are important because they define the character and shape the destiny of a nation and its people. They establish the rules of the game and influence the attitude of the public. They create an upward or downward trajectory and accelerate or decelerate towards movement and progress. Let me give you an example. The debt ceiling debate that occurred in summer of 2011, and which we are about to have again this fall, and the manner in which it was conducted and handled was a critical pivot point. Although the debate 2 years ago centered on what in the past has been a minor issue, the nature of the process and the discourse the debate, the disgust that it engendered elevated this from a symbolic, a ritualistic act in a minor pivot point area to one with significant short-term and long-term ramifications. If we have no more than instant replay of that sad and sorry spectacle this year, our confidence in and respect for the Congress, which is already at an all-time low, will go into the basement. Our selected officials need to and have to do better. Pivot point can be major, moderate, or minor in the nature. In my opinion, the major pivot point areas for the United States include the deficit and debt crisis, revenue deficits, congressional dysfunction, citizenship dysfunction, individual economic well-being, global competition, manufacturing, entrepreneurs, immigration, education, and innovation. As I noted, I'll devote my talk to individual economic well-being, global competition, education, and innovation. So before I address those areas, let me make a critical distinction between pivot points as compared to tipping points, turning points, and talking points. So tipping points and turning points refer to moments when something changes. Talking points, especially in the political sense, are used primarily for propaganda purposes, to make the same argument over and over again to ensure that nothing changes. So the United States of America, as a nation, is definitely at a tipping and a turning point. And Lord knows there have been loads of talking points. That is why we need to think in terms of pivot points. Because a pivot point implies that we can work on that point and be productive to bring about the positive change to address it. We can be the participants in the process, not passive bystanders or victims of the circumstances. We can be change agents. I'll come back to that thought at the end of my speech. So let me look at inward at the first pivot point area, individual economic well-being. I'd like to say this part of my speech, all things being unequal, that is because they are. We are at a crossroads in America today. The American economy is restructuring into three groups: the have a lot more, the have not, and have a lot less. During the 2012 election year, over and over we heard about the 1%, about 47%, and the 90%. And Mitt Romney talked more about 47% than the 1% and 99%. So for America to be America again, it is essential to ensure equality for all Americans, the 100%. Unfortunately, for the past few years, and for a much longer period, if you look at it closely, we have been headed in the wrong direction. Inequality has earned the ugly head. No matter how you look at things today, they do not look pretty. Inequality in the United States takes many forms. There's income inequality, health inequality, unemployment and underemployment inequality, generational inequality, gender inequality, asset inequality. Let me briefly highlight the nature of the inequality in a few of those areas. First, income inequality. The vast gap between income flowing to those at the top and those in the middle and lower income brackets have grown steadily over the past few years. The Center on Budget and Policy Priorities in a recent study reported that the average income of the top 1% rose by nearly 12% from 2009 to 2010 after adjusting for inflation. In contrast, the average income of the bottom 90% remained its lowest level since 1983 in inflation-adjusted dollars. But this may sound like a bit abstract, so let me put the earnings at the middle to lower rungs of the ladder in more concrete terms. In 2011, the median household income adjusted to inflation declined for the fourth straight year. The real median household income has fallen 8.1% since 2007. It gets even worse. Here is a stunning statistics. 50% of the US workers earn less than $26,364 in the year 2010. Let me turn to the health inequality in America. In January 2013, the Institute of Medicine and National Research released a report on the state of American health care that compared health outcomes in the United States to those in 16 other rich countries. The report revealed that in terms of the life expectancy, over the past 30 years, American men rank last, and women seem to last, also had much higher rates of disease. So what are the factors that contributed to the sorry state of our healthcare? That includes the poverty, education level, and a lack of healthcare coverage. The third, generational inequality. The lack of job turnover has frozen the labor market, especially for those newer to the workforce. In 2012, on average, there were about 23.4 million Americans under or unemployed. So according to Economic Policy Institute, 40% of those individuals, which translates 9.5 million people, were under 30 compared to the labor force share of 27%. The Institute says that fully 1/5 of those individuals who are working are underemployed. These inequalities and others in some ways impact almost all Americans, but they impact those on the middle and the bottom rungs of the ladder most severely. And they are the causes for a shrinking middle class and create the conditions for a lack of mobility and a potential permanent underclass. So let me turn my attention there. In August 2012, the Pew Research Center released a report with a telling title and subtitle, "The Last Decade of the Middle Class, Fewer, Poorer, and Gloomier." The Pew report found that the middle income level constituted 51% of all adults, compared to 61% in 1971. In the same time frame, the upper income tier rose to 20% from 14%, and the lower income tier rose to 20% from 25%. In 2012, the Brookings Institute also released a report on the middle class titled "Pathways to Middle Class: Balancing Personal and Public Responsibilities." The Brookings study was somewhat encouraging. It showed that the children born into middle-income families have a roughly even chance of moving up or down once they become adults. On the discouraging side, however, the Brookings study reported that those born into the poor families have a high probability of remaining poor as adults. The chances for a child born into the family in the bottom quintile to move into one of the top 3 quintiles is only 30%. That is indeed a depressing number. And those on the lower rungs of the ladder are feeling more depressed. Finally, according to the Pew survey, many of the lower class see their prospects dimming. About 3/4, 77% say it is harder now to get ahead than 10 years ago. Only half say hard work brings success, and a full 35% say they think their children will be worse off than they are. Taken in the aggregate, as I look inward, the breadth and the depth of inequality is a cause for concern for all Americans, and certain level of pessimism. As I look outward, the United States of America and our nation's status in the terms of the global competition, I have a reason for confidence and guarded optimism. I have given the 2 titles to this next section of my speech. We have only just begun, and the sun will come out tomorrow. I have to confess that when I was here in April 2011 to speak about my first book, Renewing the American Dream, A Citizen's Guide for Restoring Our Competitive Advantage, I was not nearly as positive in my assessment and perspective. At that time I said, where do we stand in the international arena today? We are running into a brick wall. That is Brazil, Russia, India, and China. These nation states have already become much fiercer economic competitors than any we faced in the last quarter of the 20th century, and will be even tougher competitors in the 21st century. Well, I'm here today to report that I was wrong then, at least for the time being, and foreseeable future. For most of the 2009 and 2010, Brazil, Russia, India, and China seem to be outperforming us substantially in economic development terms. Then in 2011 and 2012, the brick wall countries hit a wall of their own. And now, as we move toward the final quarters of 2013, the brick wall appears to be collapsing, as each of this country is having a much tougher economic time and social problem. The World Economic Forum produces an annual report on global competitiveness. Its new report should be out shortly. In the report of 2012-2013, which covered the year of 2011 and came out in September of 2012, the United States fared very well in comparison to the 4 brick wall nations. Given the performance of these countries compared to the US, I expect we do even better in the new rankings. In the 2012 and 2013 report, the overall competitiveness rankings were United States number 7, China 29th, Brazil 48, India 59th, Russia 67th. The only nations ranked ahead of the US were much smaller than we are: Switzerland, Singapore, Finland, Sweden, Netherlands, and Germany. So the forum's report provided a detailed analysis of the strengths and the weaknesses of the US versus the brick wall nations. Based upon my review of that data and rankings, the United States is in a very strong position compared to the brick wall countries. For a variety of reasons, China still appears to be a contender over the long run, and Brazil could be up and comer. Although the events in 2013, such as the nationwide strikes and economic downturn, create substantial doubt about Brazil. India is falling back into the pack, and Russia probably never belonged in the mix at all. Mr. Sharma, the head of the emerging markets and global macro at Morgan Stanley, wrote an article that entitles Broken Bricks for the November 2012 issue of the Foreign Affairs that supports my assessment. In contrast to the declining performance of the BRICS, the United States continues to do okay economically. Not great, but extremely well in comparison to most of the nations in the world, except for the smaller one, who I don't really see as a direct competition for us. So the question comes to our mind, can the United States remain the leader globally? I firmly believe so. The United States remains the primary safe haven for international investment. We already see offshore jobs coming home. Over the next 30 years, as the multinationals achieve targeted market penetration and the wage differentials between the developing nations shrink, the primary drivers for offshoring of American jobs will disappear. Finally, there's a virtually unrivaled natural resources of America. The vast expanses of habitable land, tillable soil, large bodies of fresh water, oil and natural gas, and the absolutely unrivaled, unparalleled diversity of our country's human resource base. They are the best in the world. So these should be the sources of the future competitive advantage. Our ability to harness the country's natural and human resources through innovation help make America what it is today and should enable us to prosper tomorrow. I should stress there's no guarantee of that. However, as I see, the only one who can defeat the United States in global competition is the United States by not taking care of things here at home. Richard Haas, the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, made a similar point in his new book, Foreign Policy Begins at Home, the case for putting America's house in order. Now, the third part of my speech, education and innovation. Let me turn my gaze from looking inward and outward to looking forward. Two of the keys for bringing it all back home are education and innovation. Let me talk about education first. Let me begin with an observation. We are fortunate here in the United States to have the greatest higher educational system in the entire world. It is unparalleled and unrivaled. People come from all around the world to study in our institutions of higher education because they are the very best. I came here from India and stayed and became a citizen to pay back on the investment this country made in me. And in spite of problems and wide variability in results, overall, our primary and secondary education is good. So, but there are a lot of things we can do, and there's a need and numerous opportunities for improvements in educations at all levels. I want to focus on two that are critical to the issue of economic well-being that I discussed in the beginning of my talk. First, in my opinion, most critically, we need to implement a more systematic, nationally supported approach to early childhood education. The research clearly shows that early childhood education is what matters in closing the achievement gaps between children from different socio-economic categories. Yet, at the beginning of 2013, only 8 states provided pre-K education to more than half of their 4-year-olds. That's pretty pathetic. President Obama called for cost-sharing partnership between the federal government and the state to expand high-quality, publicly supported preschool program in the State of the Union address last time. I am in complete agreement with the President on the need for that expansion. So let me shift from preschool to higher education. There are numerous things that could we do, including enhancing teacher preparation and improving graduation rates. The overriding issue for higher education is to improve its value proposition. I recently wrote a blog for the Huffington Post entitled, "Students Alone, Underutilized, Underpaid, and Underwater." In that blog, I noted that in spite of Congress passing a bill that finally nationalized the students' loan process and gave the student on the rates they will pay, the students still remain alone on a number of issues that affect them and their future. This includes the increased cost of college education, decreased financial assistance, reduced unemployment opportunities, and or underemployment upon graduation. So if you want to begin to reduce the inequality in all its forms, we need to start early with the preschool education and carry through with higher education that is accessible and affordable. That will require initiatives and innovation. So when we talk about innovation, most people probably think of technology, manufacturing, and laboratories. Indeed, that is where much of our innovation must take place. But I'd like to span those 3 points, however. In the United States today, we have 3 industries, healthcare, the government, and education, that are consistently ranked as our least productive. Each should be an industry target for innovation. We should discover and implement innovative techniques to reduce the cost and improve the quality in these 3 industries. So what would innovation in those areas look like? What about cutting the length of high school from 3 years to 2 years? That is something that President Obama talked about it recently. What about writing a better education law that actually puts the states and the federal government into symbiotic partnership to create a flexible but fair educational process that produces better results for students? That is something the Secretary of Education, Duncan, called for in a recent Washington op-ed piece. So these are just the tip of the iceberg. In my opinion, we need to put on our thinking caps and apply American ingenuity and creativity to innovate in the delivery of the healthcare, government, and educational service. Another target for innovation should be repairing America's crumbling infrastructure. Early this year, the McKinsey Global Institute issued a report entitled Infrastructure Productivity: How to Save $1 Trillion a Year. $1 trillion may not sound like a lot to lawmakers in Capitol Hill, but it's real money to me and you, a lot of money. So moreover, money spent to save money on infrastructure would go a long way to creating good-paying jobs in the construction industry, which have rebounded a little bit since the end of the Great Recession, but it still has a long way to go. That is why it seems to me that there is a big opportunity to address the infrastructure in an innovative fashion. The history of innovation in the United States has always been an interdependent between the public and private sector. The government has provided funding and in some cases taken the lead in developing new initiatives that move the country and economy forward. Think about this: the Erie Canal, Lincoln support of transcontinental railroad, the Panama Canal, bringing electricity to rural America, and Eisenhower's support of the interstate highway system. And let me add to the list President Roosevelt's WPA projects, NASA, and his satellite used for weather forecasting, communication, and global positioning system, the internet. They all come from the government. The government funded these initiatives. So as we go forward, the government needs to be the major investor in the research and development for America to win the research and development race. But the private sector needs to put its money where the innovation mouth is as well. So let me take a second and look backward at what pivot points have meant in America's history in this section of my speech titled Being and Becoming. I hinted at that just earlier by talking about the Transcontinental Railroad, the Panama Canal, and the interstate highway system. The United States as a nation is only 237 years old. Over the short history of our country, there have been scores of major pivot points which have determined the economic and social terrain for this nation and for its citizens. For example, consider the Constitutional Convention, the Bill of Rights, the Civil War, the Morrill Act, which gave us our higher educational system, Teddy Roosevelt's trust busting, the passage of Social Security, the GI Bill, the Civil Rights Acts of 1964, and Medicare legislation. So now consider for a moment what might have happened if the results of the resolution of those pivot points might have been different. Pivot points matter. They have and are and will shape the stream of American history and our nation's destiny. How we handle our current pivot points will speak volumes about who we are as a people and send a message all around the globe that will resonate throughout the world. Pivot points treated properly should not be about endings or beginning, but about being and becoming. This should be about listening and learning. This should be about realizing the full potential and possibilities of America and the Americans. Let me conclude my remarks. So I have looked inward outward, forward, and backward. So that means my speech is over. Right. Now, so with your permission, I'd like to extend my remarks just a little to talk about community college, why they're important to the future of America. So look around the auditorium. What do you see? I'll tell you what I see. I see our next generation of leaders, as Dr. Pollard very eloquently pointed out. You are the hope of tomorrow. I see a group of individuals who, because of the special role the community colleges and community college students are assuming in today's society, can and will be the leaders in helping us address the pivot points of income inequality and global competition. While one of the functions of the community college should be to educate students so they can go on and get a 4-year advanced degrees, the most important part of community college is to equip the students with the skills required to enter the workforce, to earn a good living, and to make their contribution to sustaining the American dream. In 2010, President Obama announced the launch of the initiative titled Skills for America's Future as a means to bring industry and community colleges together to create the 21st century workforce. The members of that workforce are our leaders and will enable us to compete in the global economy. They will fill the middle skill gap in our employment pool. Filling this gap is essential to the future success of the nation. Research done by the Organization and Economic Cooperation and Development for its skills beyond the school project shows that a decade from now, 1 in 3 American jobs will require a career and technical education credentials of some type. Community colleges are uniquely positioned to provide those credentials. By earning those credentials, community college students will become leaders. Now, it is said that leaders are born, not made. I do not subscribe to that notion. Leaders come in all shapes and sizes, from all walks of life. They are individuals who are properly prepared and able to fill the gaps and address the needs that exist. Community college students with the right heads and hearts meet that definition. That is what they deserve and will be among our next generation of leaders. Tom Brokaw wrote a book about the World War II generation titled The Greatest Generation. I believe that you, students in this audience here today, have the opportunity to earn that title. So as I close my comments, let me speak directly to you and make a request of you. We are not in a world war today, but we are in a war on the income front that has many dimensions and pivot points. We need to win that war for America to be America. Too many Americans are becoming cynical and dropping out the potential and pivot point process. This allows a minority or fringe groups to determine our future. We cannot allow that to happen. That is why I'm asking each and every one of you to pick a pivot point that matters to you as a citizen and get involved. Don't sit on the sideline or be an armchair quarterback. Roll up your sleeves and get out on the playing field. So becoming a pivot person, commit yourself to work on that point until the necessary and desired outcome is achieved. I must caution you, however, working and moving forward on a pivot point is a long, hard slog. It is a marathon, not a 100-yard dash. It requires patience and persistence, and the ability to come back again and again after defeats. In this regard, let me share the words of one of my favorite leaders, Winston Churchill, who spoke to the schoolboys at Harrow schools in 1941, near the beginning of World War II. Mr. Churchill said, and I quote, "Never give in, never give in, never, never, never give in, except to conviction of honor and good sense." End of quotation. That was a good advice more than 70 years ago. It is a good advice today as we work to win the pivot point war. So it may not be this year, it may be the next year, it may not be till the end of this decade, and may even be longer. Eventually it will be done, because time is on the side of those with the persistence, with the patience, and the principles to work those pivot points to make America work again. So thank you for listening to me today. I look forward to joining all of you in working those pivot points. God bless you.
Wasn't that wonderful? Let's thank our speaker once again. I want to thank you for your attendance tonight, and I hope you'll join us for other lectures in the Athenaeum's Symposia series. Good night and safe travels. Thank you.